Hello. Now, if you're concerned about the profound impact that mass immigration is having on this nation and its communities, I invite you to attend an important New Culture Forum conference on immigration that we are holding in London on Saturday, the 7th of October. Now, we are bringing together leading experts and other notable and well-known voices who will speak openly, candidly, and honestly about the problems arising from mass immigration and why the government seems incapable of controlling it. Most importantly, in keeping with the New Culture Forum's mission to provide solutions to Britain's problems, the participants will also present their suggestions to Britain's migration crisis and explain how they would tackle the consequences of uncontrolled migration as we see it now. We will also host a panel discussion between some of our smaller political parties, Reform, Reclaim and the SDP, to see how they would approach this issue. So I very much hope you'll join us at this crucial conference. Tickets and further information are available in the description below this video, as well as on Eventbrite and via our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. And remember, NCF members get discounted admission. Thank you, and I hope to see you there.
To kick off the final hour, we're going to be looking at wokery in Whitehall. We all knew that this was going on, but quite how bad, I don't think we did. A Cabinet Secretary has been warned by senior civil servants of a woke takeover of Whitehall that risks improperly influencing government policy. Simon Case was told in a letter signed by 42 staff from 16 departments that ideology on gender promoted by trans activists has become embedded in the civil service in a significant breach of impartiality. Well, here to talk about this is Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, who's a Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum. They do grand work there. Rafe, hey, great to have you on the show. How are you doing?
Absolute pleasure. Lovely to be with you for the first time.
I know, yeah. Well, if you're good, we might have you back and do this again. I mean, we all know that the civil service is basically a hotbed of pretty left-wing and liberal viewpoints. But what's being said in this letter, and, you know, when people are motivated to actually have to write to the Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, and say, we're worried, actually, that this has become so intrinsic to groupthink in the civil service, this could start affecting government policy or the application of government policy, then we've got a problem, don't we?
We do. Well, it's institutional capture, you know, over the course of the last 26 years since the election of New Labour in '97, we've had a long march through all of our institutions, be it everything from the British Museum and the British Library to our armed forces, even to our increasingly woke corporations. Half of that period, 13 years, has been under an allegedly conservative government. You know, we used to boast quite rightly that we had the Rolls Royce of civil services. These days, I think it's much closer to being a Robin Reliant. What these revelations actually confirm is what we've always known, of course, that the Whitehall is working against the government's agenda, that the employees who are there to put government policy into action don't actually believe what they are being asked to put forward to, and in fact that they're trying to thwart it. And this comes, of course, remember, this comes just after it was revealed that the Foreign Office's top civil servant revealed to his staff that he voted for Remain, a revelation that was completely without precedent and a complete breach of impartiality. It comes just after the civil servant in charge of asylum policy and implementing asylum policy left the job to work at Amnesty International, which favours open-door asylum policies, and where you have Sue Gray, former permanent secretary of the cabinet, now working for the Labour Party. So I think, you know, everyone should actually realise that the Prime Minister and the cabinet secretary must act on this reporting in the Telegraph and the other cases I've cited, because impartiality in the civil service is the cornerstone of what we love about it. And that means, of course, we need to eliminate all of this diversity and unconscious bias training and anything else which advances theory over scientific or historical fact. So that's the pushing that we see here of critical race theory, people being taught about white privilege and white supremacy and the importance of decolonization. None of that should be taking place within our civil service. The same goes for gender ideology. You know, we've just had the Metropolitan Police's commissioner say that the police will not be allowed to wear pride flags or to take the knee or do anything that really compromises the public's perception of impartiality. We need to have the same thing from our civil service. The police and the civil service must both be seen to be impartial and to act without fear or favour.
You know, one criticism that often comes from people who, well, let's just call them wokeatrons, let's call them what they are, when we talk about these issues, is they say, well, this is the culture wars that the right themselves are coming up with. They're just little things. All we're saying is that trans people should be treated fairly and all the rest of it, and it's the right using this to try and shore up support and inventing things. But one document aimed at educating civil servants said part of gender transition is living in the gender with which a person identifies. This includes using the facilities they feel are right to them, such as toilets and changing. Basically what this is saying is that if you're a man and you say, man, I feel like a woman, you can use female toilets. And the problem with this, and I've said this time and again, if you leave your front door open, right, if I left my front door in central London open for a couple of days, I'm pretty certain that some sort of horrible person will come in and do something horrible in my house. They'll probably nick my telly and Lord knows what. You just don't do it, do you? Because opportunists are out there. That is not to say that, you know, 90% of people who live near me or, you know, walking around near me in central London are burglars and robbers. They're probably not. They're probably really decent people. If you have a policy where any man can say, I identify as a woman, and come into female spaces, very delicate female spaces, be they toilets or changing rooms, you're going to get perverts, right? And so this is, I think, what you're saying about, you know, when it comes to this, it's not about feeling, it's not about trendy, you know, opinions and, you know, hashtags on Twitter. It's about science and it's about fact. And when it comes to policy making, we cannot allow this stuff to just creep in.
That's right, and it's also about not going along with the law, because the law actually allows for single-sex spaces to be protected. And so here you have the civil service actually implementing or forwarding on policy which runs contrary to what the law says. But you're quite right. This goes beyond. Look, I'm very much in favour of being absolutely accommodating and accepting of trans people in our lives, but within, of course, the bounds of reason. A lot of this, of course, all starts through HR departments. It's been the HR departments of our civil service departments, of our increasingly woke corporations, of our armed forces that have been the back door through which a lot of this ideology has come in. So as we've seen the rise of HR in public life, we're seeing the rise of this. And the problem is, huge segments of the civil service disagree vehemently with this, as you also find within the armed forces, as you will find in corporations. But they are being bullied into silence. And that's the problem. The Equalities Act permits and allows people to express the views that you've just read out about, you know, having access to toilets and so forth. But it also permits gender-critical beliefs. And the problem is the civil service is punishing people who want to express gender-critical beliefs. And it does that through a variety of means, not least, of course, is just making people too scared to speak out for fear of losing promotions, for fear of losing salary negotiation raises, so forth. It's very insidious. But you know what? There's a big double-edged sword to all of this diversity policy, because the civil service's goal is to become the biggest, most inclusive employer in the UK. But of course, that means increasing its ethnic diversity. And the civil service is soon going to find itself employing a segment of the population with far more socially conservative views than is the case with the wider population. And the majority in this country of religious Muslims, Hindus and evangelical Africans and people from the Caribbean do not embrace gender ideology. Many of them actually think that homosexuality should be illegal and have outdated views about women's rights too. So gender ideology is a complete non-starter, and how the civil service is going to square that circle is beyond my capacity.
I am so glad you said that, because one of the funniest things, I was just flicking through the paperwork here, the original article, because I read it somewhere and it just popped in my head. It's one of the funniest things I've ever read, the biggest lot of mumbo-jumbo and wokery. And you know how they love to sort of create a Venn diagram of woke and identity politics, the intersectionality of everything. And one of these reports that have been disseminated amongst the civil service has said that, you know, when it comes to biological sex, that you know, and the sort of gender-critical theories, that this is an imposition of colonialism and white privilege. And I'm like, hang on a minute. As someone who's lived in, you know, India and Africa and worked in Pakistan and all the rest of it, just like you said, pretty sure that these woke ideologies don't gain much traction among the Maasai tribes and all the rest of it. Some of the most socially conservative people I know are living in Commonwealth countries, and it's pretty much fabrication of Westerners when it comes to some of these sort of neo-theologies that we're getting imposed upon us. Rafe, what do we do about it? That's what I want to know. It seems to me that there is this sort of takeover, and whether it's Jacob Rees-Mogg trying to make civil servants actually turn up at the office and, you know, demon headmaster, like putting post-it notes on people's computer screens, it doesn't succeed. I mean, it seems to me the civil service drives the government rather than the other way round. How on earth can we reverse this?
Well, of course, that's the greatest weapon in the arsenal of the civil service, is its longevity. It sees one government in, it sees one government out, ministers come and go seemingly with a conveyor belt revolving door. I think, you know, we should actually consider thinking seriously about implementing Dominic Cummings reforms. Love him or loathe him, Dominic Cummings understood the issues at play here, from the BBC to the Red Wall to the civil service. And he wanted to have a whole-scale reform, essentially bringing about an end to the permanent civil service in many ways, ensuring that government policy advisors would actually be parachuted directly into civil service departments to ensure that government policy is enacted. That doesn't happen right now. You have permanent secretaries, people like the cabinet secretary, who basically are all things to all people. That position needs to be split asunder because there are too much influence and too much power in one person. The advertising of jobs, they're supposed to be advertising all positions openly on the internet, but a huge number of positions are actually advertised internally too often. What also happens is the civil service rewards people who are conformists and who toe the civil service line. So bright young things who have radical new ideas and think outside the box, they are prevented from coming in and bringing in fresh new thinking. There needs to be such a big overhaul. No one's ever fired in the civil service as well. People are rewarded for failure. They're just moved along sideways when things go wrong. Michael Gove will get the blame when actually one of his civil servants was the person who's screwed things up. There needs to be more accountability in the civil service. Once you start to fire people, once you start to really hold them, make them accountable for what they're doing, that's one of the only ways I think you can see real change. But it has to be driven by external people who come in to oversee that change.
Rafe, thank you ever so much. I agree with everything you have just said there. That was Rafe Heydel-Mankoo from the New Culture Forum.